With Chainsaw Man Chapter 210, Tatsuki Fujimoto officially ran out of any Fs to give at this point because we've seen him do some pretty bold things in the past when it came to making statements, but this is a pretty damning statement if we're being honest here. When you look at what it is that he is saying about the world and mankind and just America in general. So without further ado, let's get right into it because Chainsaw Man Chapter 210, it is centered around the thematic weight of war's resurgence, America's cultural role in war itself, and Fujimoto has a very bold commentary about it all through Yoru and Denji's potential rebirth. So we're going to start things off with the resurrection of war and America's beautiful chaos that's also known as America's beautiful violence. So chapter 210 is one of Fujimoto's, I would say, arguably one of his most politically charged and philosophically cynical chapters to date in the Chainsaw Man series, and that's saying a lot because we've had school shooters being mimicking Yuko, and we've had the Statue of Liberty transformed into a gun, but Fujimoto takes it a step further in this chapter because he is presenting a grotesque celebration of war's resurgence, not through using the usual battlefield or political tension the way that a lesser writer would do, but instead it's through the rebirth of the nuclear weapons devil, symbolizing the reawakening of a idea that humanity supposedly forgot. The nuclear weapons devil is currently inside of Pochita's stomach, but mankind has remade nuclear weapons, which means that there's going to be a new nuclear weapons devil potentially because of how fear makes devils stronger in Chainsaw Man. At the center of all of this is Yoru, the war devil, who has now reclaimed a lot of her terrifying strength thanks to the violent war-hungry nature of humanity, and Fujimoto particularly singles out the United States of America when he does this, which you have to wonder if potentially current events played a role in what it is that he's doing here, because Chainsaw Man right now is set in the late 90s, and in the late 90s we weren't quite yet in the war era that we would see with, say, the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq. America wasn't involved in a lot of the proxy wars that it's involved in right now. There weren't proxy wars on this level that we have at this point in time, and it's one of those things where you do have to wonder, is Fujimoto mixing in some of current state of affairs with what he's doing here, which isn't uncommon for anime and manga, but this is definitely the most bold instance that I can think of in recent history. Now, the chapter begins with the detonation of the nuclear weapon after Yoru has her monologue going on, and we see it on a broadcast in what is unmistakably Times Square or something very similar to Times Square. We see Americans cheering at the live footage, and it is a scene that, if it strikes you as being uncomfortable or haunting, then it means that Fujimoto did his job. This is a damning indictment on just humanity in general, because it is Fujimoto saying that at its core, mankind is always going to gravitate towards violence, in particular war, which is the most extreme form of violence that we as mankind can basically bring ourselves to carry out. Yoru's narration makes the message crystal clear, where there's no mistaking it. She's saying it's because of America. In this moment, Fujimoto, he takes the sledgehammer to the whole concept of being subtle. The revival of the nuclear weapons, despite the concept itself being erased from human memory after being consumed by Chainsaw Man, it isn't a supernatural fluke. It's not even magic. It is human nature. Specifically, it is American culture. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that there was something that came out that said that like America has more weapons than like the next 20 or 30 countries combined. So I see what Fujimoto is doing here. Again, this is very bold. Now, Yoru, at this point, she goes a step further and she's smiling at the falling devil, a primal fear incarnate, and she basically literally declares victory. She turns the literal embodiment of falling, a deeply primal fear, coded into human survival instincts. The moment that a baby learns how to start walking, they now get the fear of falling. That is one of the oldest fears known to man. And yet, despite this, Yoru basically turns her into a jacket, a trophy, a spoil of war. This was intentional by Fujimoto. I like that. I got exactly what he was doing when he said that, when Yoru said that she was cold and she looked at the falling devil. This is after victory to the victor goes the spoil. So I love the imagery here. For as much political commentary that Fujimoto had here, he definitely still has his writing touch here. There's a lot of subtle stuff that really makes you appreciate the manga when you really just pick up on it. Now, Fujimoto, he's basically in a situation where this moment wasn't just about defeating a devil. Fujimoto is pitting two types of fear against one another, and this is very big for the thematic of this chapter. One fear is a biological and universal fear, that being the fear of falling. The other fear is a man-made and an ideological fear, a manufactured fear, that being war itself. And in this moment, Yoru, the war devil, she wins. War itself wins. Yoru is the personification of human conflict. She triumphs over what should have been a more deeply rooted natural fear. The message is loud and clear. Humans fear their own creations more than the instincts that they are born with. And that brings me to that line that Yoru says, where she says that she wasn't in love with Denji, but instead she was in love with America. This is a very narcissistic thing that she is saying here, and yet for Yoru's character, it makes a lot of sense for her to even come to this conclusion. So when Yoru finally admits that she was never really in love with Denji, but instead with America, it's the emotional crescendo of the chapter's very horrifying thesis that we have. It's not literal romance. It is adoration for destruction, violence, fear, and domination. Her love for America is not tied to its ideals. It's not tied to what America could be, but instead it is tied to its war making. War is what she feels made her feel beautiful. Love for her is being equated with war, making her feel feared. There's war all over the place, and yet Fujimoto is highlighting the strongest country on the planet to kind of drive home what it is that he is trying to say about war in general and just society in general. Now, Fujimoto further leans into this grotesque irony because he also has the American national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, being sung in the background, and he has Yoru mockingly place her hand over her heart. These visuals, they juxtapose the national pride with unthinkable destruction. We have charred landscapes. We have survivors crawling out the rubble, trying to walk through the rubble. We have rows and rows of hundreds of dead bodies. And it is all being framed and shown to us as the national anthem is being sung. It is one of the most powerful set of pages in Chainsaw Man. It is one of the most provoking, and when this gets animated, I know there are going to be people pissed off on this. That's just the era that we're in. I'm a firm believer art should not be constrained, nor should it be contained. Artists are free to make their commentaries, and you are free to disagree with them. But I will say that's big balls to continue to just triple down on what he's done in the past. And what I like about this is that Chainsaw Man, by glorifying the nuclear weapons and showing this contrasted imagery, especially when you contrast it with what the words that are being sung for the national anthem stand for, it mocks the performative nationalism that can often mask the human cost of violence, and it is part of his commentary on human nature. Think about what I just said. It is mocking the performative nationalism that can often mask the inhuman cost of violence, because to a certain degree there are times where people in a country like, say, America, since that's the concept of this chapter, there are times where we just have this national rally around the flag effect, where logic goes out the window and we say, I'm American, I'm just supporting the country no matter what it is that it does. There's just something to it. That's a nationalism, that's a nationalist type of pride. And there are times where we can look at it and say, hey, this terrible thing might be going on and our country might be doing it, but we still support our country by large and far. Will there be dissenting voices? Absolutely. That is the whole point of a chapter like this. This should start conversations. I'll be curious to see what the reaction on social media would be. Now, the symbolism here, it is also very unmistakable. Even though Chainsmen devoured the ideas, the very concept of nukes themselves, America resurrected it. Not through magic, not through devils, not through a godlike entity, but through obsession, ideology, and a refusal to let go of its warlike identity. This is Fujimoto basically saying America is the land of the free, but America is also the land that thrives off of war. Not all war has to be declared. Again, we have proxy wars. In essence, he's basically saying that humanity reinvented hell on earth by reintroducing the nuclear weapons devil. And this is or the nuclear weapons in general, even though the nuclear weapons devil's not there. And this is very fitting, just given the fact that we are now in the arc where the death devil, the most feared of the, I would argue, primal fears, since everything fears death to an extent, barring your religious beliefs. But this is one of those times where he introduces something that could literally wipe out all of humanity. That is bold. Now, the other thing that we have here is we have to remember, for as striking as this was, this isn't the first time that Fujimoto has critiqued American violence, because there's a pattern that has been on display in part 2 of Chainsaw Man. The same way that he kind of poked at things that were dealing with Japan in part 1 of Chainsaw Man, he's poking at America in part 2. Look at how he's made references to America's perceived love affair with guns, with violence, and just military power in general. Earlier arcs, they featured how there were people in America that were losing their trigger fingers in order to summon up the strength for the gun that Yoru would use, that big sniper rifle that would also be shown coming out of the Statue of Liberty. This is just one example of how he has given his perception of what he believes is a glorified love of violence that we have as Americans. Even when you go back to Yuko's arc, while that itself didn't necessarily involve guns directly, it bore the unsettling atmosphere of a school shooter narrative, the way that she was behaving, going from the bully to hunting down the bullies and the kids running in the hallways. Fujimoto is someone who is very attuned to his Western audience. That was not done by mistake. So it's one of those things, especially given where Chainsaw Man is set in the 90s. Columbine happened in the 90s. And as somebody that grew up in the 90s, I picked up on what he did. And it's very fitting that Yuko in that moment became a monster. What we're seeing here, it echoes the psyche behind many of the dirtier parts of our wonderful country. Through Yuko, through the gun devil, through the nuclear weapons devil, Fujimoto is painting a chilling portrait where there's a culture where violence is both normalized and mythological and also something that is feared. And this brings me to Yoru herself. Yoru is being presented as a symbol of eternal war. Yoru's character has now become more than just a devil. She is a statement. Despite devils being forgotten, she's slowly begun to thrive throughout Chainsaw Man Part 2 because war never truly dies. Peace, it is always temporary. War, because of human nature, it is inevitable. The revival of the nuclear weapons devil, it serves as a metaphor for how ideas of war, they can never truly be erased, not when they're so deeply ingrained in the psyche of nations, especially a nation as powerful as our own. I love my country, but that is a truth. This gives a whole new meaning to her battle with the falling devil. War is not falling, it is rising. It's crawling back into the collective consciousness of people around the world in Chainsaw Man, not as something to fear, but also as something to cheer. And that brings me to Denji and the Death Devil and how Fujimoto is once again tackling the subject of rebirth. This time it is Denji being reborn or brought back from a near-death state into an age of violence. And Denji himself wants to be viewed as being a superhero. And it does make you wonder what's going to happen to Mitaka based on her asking Yoru in this chapter, are you really going to do it? Mitaka knows whatever Yoru wanted to do was going to be something insane because she warned Denji, Yoru cannot be allowed to carry out our plan. So in the final moments of the chapter, it's quiet, but it's also deeply ominous. Denji, recently broken, almost dead, if you will, or near death, he meets a mysterious girl who isn't Fami, but instead she introduces herself as simply D, which is short for death, which again, we know that who he believes to be Fami is really the Death Devil, the final of the four horsewomen, and possibly the most feared devil of them all. But Fujimoto doesn't frame her entrance as an ending, but instead, this whole thing is being framed like a potential rebirth or a bringing back from a near-death state, because we know that the Death Devil can control life and death itself, or at least that's what has been implied. Denji might be about to return, but the context behind his revival, that is what matters. The world has just reawakened nuclear warfare. War is back on the stage. And now, with Death herself making herself known to Denji, we're no longer just dealing with devils born of fear. We're entering into a cycle where war, death, and violence, they are inescapable constraints. They are inescapable constants. Yoru's victory, it sets the stage for Denji's eventual return, not as a hero, but someone who is caught in the endless machinery of conflict and death that humanity keeps resurrecting, no matter how hard Chainsman tries to erase it. Fujimoto's message in chapter 210, it is bold and it is a bleak reflection of the modern world itself. War will never die as long as humans remember how to hate and how to inevitably celebrate it. Those people cheering as they saw the nuclear weapons going off are no different than the humans that lived during the Roman Empire, where they watched people fight inside of the stadium with the gladiators and the lions and things of that nature. It's just part of human nature, sadly. And you have to believe that whatever Fujimoto's going for in the long run here, you have to believe that hopefully he's giving a message that mankind, just as it is taught to fear and to hate, it can also be taught to love as well, and that you can overcome it. But Chainsman's a dark story, so that might not be the direction he's taking this. Even with primal fears like the falling devil not truly being a match for the horror of human intervention, which has now powered up Yoru, and now that death herself is more prominently in the spotlight, Fujimoto seems to be asking us, if war is back, then who's going to die next? Because like I said in the last review, it does kind of feel like war and the Death Devil, we have to look at them almost like they're twins, even though they're not literally twins, just based on how war and death are intertwined. This was a longer review than normal because, I mean, when you do something this bold, it deserves an unbiased breakdown. And I am curious to know if any of you guys were offended by the chapter. If you're not American, how do you feel about what it is that Fujimoto has done here in part 2, and especially in this chapter? Let me know down in the comment section below. But as always, guys, if you like anything I had to say, don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Have an awesome day, guys.